Jordan sent in a question that was troubling him from Barbri.
It's a practice essay for torts about a minor league ball team named the Fernbury Flies. So I took a look at it, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of issues with this essay and the answer that would give students a lot of unnecessary anxiety and consternation. So I'm going to try to clear that up for you. Here's the key facts. The Fernbury Flies are playing a game in their home ballpark, which they own and operate, and one of their players, Dennis, hits a ball out of the park. The ball lands in a street adjacent to the ballpark where it hits our plaintiff, Penny, in the head. And she gets a concussion. The facts don't have any other detail about Dennis hitting the ball. Here's what the facts do say. Over 40 years, a total of 30 balls have been hit out of the ballpark and into that street. 15 of those in the last 10 years. This ballpark had fencing that is identical in height and kind to all the other ballparks in the league. Then the facts say that in Japan, in congested areas, ballparks have netting over them so that the baseball doesn't go into a neighboring street. The call to question requires us to analyze a negligence case brought by Penny against the ball club and against Dennis, the batter. I'll walk you through some of my reactions to the hypo. First, the numbers. What's up with all these numbers? How many fly balls exit the stadium? So let's see, first 30 years, that's 0.5 balls per year. Is that supposed to be a lot? In the last 10 years, that's 1.5 balls per year, 300% the previous rate. Didn't they say I wouldn't need a calculator? Or is that not supposed to be so many? Okay, what does it mean that all the ballparks in the league have the same height? Does that mean it's a really strong custom? As far as preventing balls from leaving the stadium, it really doesn't mean anything to know the fence height unless we know the distances to the fences. Doesn't the person who wrote this problem know anything about baseball? Psst, there's a lesson here, which is that Barbri questions aren't perfect. If you go into studying with Barbri assuming that their questions are perfect, and any kind of dissonance means that you don't understand the law, you're going to drive yourself crazy. And you're already high strung because you're studying for the bar exam. Now, what's up with the netting in Japan? I don't know. It doesn't say much about whether not having a net is a breach of the duty of care. Do they have stronger hitters? Smaller ballparks? Are they overcautious in Japan? There's no information like that. In point of actual fact, I've been to Japan. They just might be overcautious. They put safety cones on everything. If you stand on a street corner looking hazardous long enough, they'll put a safety cone on you. Finally, why are Dennis and the Fernbury Flies two separate defendants? What am I supposed to do with that? I suppose that the ball club has to know the history, how many balls have gone over the fence, and Dennis doesn't necessarily know that. If you have superior knowledge, that can increase the care that's required. But the question doesn't really set that up cleanly. Overall, as a bar exam taker, this question would be giving me serious heartburn because it makes me feel like I'm missing something. What we're going to find is that all my hand-wringing over these numbers and these weird facts about the netting in Japan was all giving me needless anxiety. My consternation really stemmed from the fact that I was assuming perfection in this exercise. But this is an essay hypo that's not perfect. It's not well designed. It's an untidy mess. Here's the thing. We've got to be practical, expedient. We don't need to write an exam answer that proves we've found the underlying coherence of the problem, which is good because I'm telling you, this problem is an untidy mess. We just gotta write something that scores points. We just gotta write something that shows we understand negligence by applying relevant law to some facts that we pull out of this problem. So, how would I approach this problem? What should you always do? I feel like I've covered this before. You gotta go through the elements. Negligence has 5 elements. Duty, breach of duty, actual causation, proximate causation, and injury. Duty I'd say that the ballpark owes Penny a duty because she's a foreseeable plaintiff. Balls have gone over the fence into the street before, so it's foreseeable that someone there could get hit in the head. Breach. We can argue something to the jury about the number of balls being hit over the fence being a lot. The Japan thinks netting is a reasonable precaution, I guess, and therefore, I don't know. What am I supposed to argue? That Japan's safety customs are better than ours? So back to basics. If I'm stuck on breach, what is the most basic rule?
It's just reasonable person. What would the reasonable person do? That's the standard.
Coming to the plate, Mr. Clutch. Reasonable person.
What the reasonable person would do. The plaintiff can argue that there is a breach because the reasonable actor would have used netting. Now, here's where we get to Jordan's particular question. When does custom/usage in an industry create or alter a duty when discussing negligence? Yeah, I think that's a very natural question to have coming out of this, but I think that it comes from misplaced trust in Barbri's exam exercise, because ultimately it's the wrong question to ask. We don't need to know when custom alters a duty. We just have to apply the rule of law to the facts. And the rule is that custom is probative of the standard of care, but not dispositive. I feel like I've said that before also.
Here's the thing. It's a very simple rule. Custom is probative, but not dispositive. Now, you should use those words because they make you sound smart, but actually it's not that hard. Custom tends to show what the standard of care is, but it doesn't settle the matter.
So we'll say that the defendant can argue that the prevailing custom of having fences at this height and no netting is reasonable, but that's not dispositive. And we can say that the plaintiff can argue that the custom in Japan indicates the custom around here is below the reasonable level. And we can write, and the plaintiff can argue that the fact that more than one ball a year goes into this street indicates that the prevailing custom is below the level of reasonable care at this point. So that's all we have to do. And that's good because really it's all we can do. Let's just quickly sketch out going through the rest of the elements to finish this off. Assuming lack of netting is a breach, there's actual causation because if the netting had been there, Penny wouldn't have been injured anyway. Proximate causation is satisfied because Penny and her injury are foreseeable results of not having netting that keeps balls inside the ballpark. And the injury requirement is met because the facts say she got a concussion, and that's a physical injury that is sufficient for a negligence case. Now, as to the issue of Dennis being a separate defendant, I'd say something about how the ball club definitely has knowledge of these balls that have gone over the fence in the past 40 years, and Dennis might not have knowledge of that. So his standard of care might be lower, and therefore it might be more difficult to win a negligence case against him. But in the real world, you would never sue a minor league ball player here because you're just going to transfer all this sympathy from the plaintiff to the defense side that way. But I take it that's not what I'm supposed to talk about. I'm just supposed to apply the law to the facts.
Now we got to talk about Barbri's model answer. When I looked at Barbri's model answer, I should have videoed my reaction because, whoa, I was aghast. I mean, if Barbri's model answer were a real answer done for the real bar exam, I would certainly think it's entitled to a passing score. But as a model answer for students to aspire to or emulate, lots of problems. I won't catalog them all, but I got to talk about industry custom in Japan and the US and the surprising thing that Barbri did with regard to Dennis. Dennis first. Barbri did something completely different from me with regard to Dennis. Barbri sees a huge difference between the Fernbury Flies and Dennis as to liability. Barbri says that against Dennis, the negligence claim will fail because there were no reasonable measures that Dennis could have taken to avoid hitting Penny. What? Barbri says that Dennis couldn't take the precaution of holding back on his swing or not hitting the ball because, quote, obviously, any action of this nature would directly conflict with the requirements of Dennis's job. What are you talking about? Oh yeah, the "it was my job" defense. That is not a thing. Has Barbri ever heard of the Nuremberg trials? You can't avoid liability for harming someone because you were employed to do it.
There are many good reasons to argue that Dennis didn't act unreasonably, but conflicting with his job is not one of them. But you know what? I'm confident that wouldn't have prevented this answer from getting a passing score. Let's look at this issue of industry custom in Japan and the US.
Now, recall that my reaction to this in the hypo was, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with this. Well, lo and behold, the Barbri answer doesn't really do much with this either about the netting in Japan or the height of the fences. Here's all that the Barbri answer says about it. They say that because the parks in Japan use netting, netting must be feasible. And that's all they say about Japan.
For the U.S., the model answer notes that U.S. ballparks have fences of the same height and apparently no netting, but evidence of this custom, while relevant, is not dispositive of the standard of care. And that's all they say about it.
That's all they say about custom as to other U.S. ballparks. That's it. They did even less with it than I did.
And I was resigned to the idea that I was missing something.
Why did I spend all that energy trying to figure out what that meant? The grand explanation of all this is that it's kind of a slapdash essay exercise that Barbri's given you. So I'm going to go ahead and issue a student vindicated here.
Barbri's questions are not all going to be sparklingly wonderful. Here's the good news. The actual bar exam, they have experts review the questions, so you should get better quality questions and answers and analysis for the actual bar exam. The right way to deal with your frustration over imperfect Barbri materials is to watch me bludgeon a Barbri book. Take it.
Now, the real bar exam is almost certainly going to have higher quality materials, but it's not impossible that the bar exam will have a question that's got some loose ends and some untidiness to it as well. So remember, it's not your job in your written answer to prove that you found some underlying coherence in the problem that makes everything make sense and ties it all together. What you need to do is stay practical, apply law to some facts that you pull out of the essay, score points, show that you understand the relevant law by applying law to facts. Move on, keep being productive.
Thank you for the question, Jordan.
If you believe you've been victimized by a bad bar prep question, don't let it threaten your sanity. Send it to me. I'll fight for the explanation you deserve.